Genesis chapter 39, and we're going to do two chapters today. We're going to do Genesis 39 and Genesis 40. We're going to look at Joseph's temptation and Joseph's imprisonment because he went to jail. And we're also going to look at how he interprets things. And he had a gift to be able to interpret dreams, which is interesting. But last time, remember what we looked at? We looked at Judah and his transgression and then his confession. And we saw Judah sinning, falling into sin, but then saying, well, there's a whore is more righteous than me. A prostitute is more righteous than I am. But now the rest of the book of Genesis is all going to be about Joseph. And remember, Joseph is a type of Christ more times in the Bible than anybody else. Did Jesus go to jail? Yeah. Yeah. Was he innocent? Yeah. Well, Joseph was innocent. Did Jesus get tempted? Yeah. We see the temptation of Joseph. Well, remember, Jesus was tempted. So many things in the life of Joseph lines up with the life of Jesus. And so now we're going to be looking at Joseph, what happens to him, and how the rest of the book mostly is about how he ends up being an innocent person who has to pay a price to save the people of Israel. Who does that remind you of? Jesus, the innocent, and he came to save his people. Unfortunately, many of them rejected him, but some of them did not. But we can be saved through Jesus Christ. So, Genesis chapter 39 and 40, and it says, "And Joseph was brought down to Egypt." It says Joseph was brought down. Now, having been in Israel, that's just so fascinating because Jerusalem is something like 2,400 feet above sea level, but in that place where I had to stay for the last 5 days, I was up on top of like the 20th something floor, and I was in Jerusalem and I could see the Dead Sea. So you're that close to where you can literally see it, and the Dead Sea is the lowest place on earth. So he went down. So he was up around that area. He was kind of up in the hills, and then he went down into Egypt. And here's a neat story for you. Where he went down, they probably would have followed the route closest to the water. So you've got the Red Sea there. And our tour guide took us all the way to, it's called Eilat. Eilat is the southernmost town of Israel. And it's right next to the Red Sea, Gulf of Aqaba, if I remember right. And the water is so clear. And I picked up a bunch of rocks from under the water. There's no beach. It was all little rocks about this big. So I picked up some of those rocks. And this week they laid the foundation of our house where we're hoping to move to. And I took those rocks and I put them underneath before they put the cement down. So now our house is holy ground when we get to ever move into it. Wouldn't that be cool? But the whole time I was over there, I was looking at all this, and it's all desert until you get to Egypt. But then over here's the water. And then there's a little mountain right there, and here's the border to Egypt. And so he drove us all the way to the border, and the border guards were yelling at us. I just ignored them. I'm like, you stay on that side, I'll stay on my side. But the Egyptian border guards were not very nice. But we're there, and as I was reading this and getting this ready, I was thinking that must have been where he passed. Because he went into Egypt, and that's the way you go down to Egypt, but you'd want the water next to you. You wouldn't want to walk through the desert on your way to. So I'm thinking to myself, man, I must have walked in the same places where Joseph would have walked at one time. Isn't that amazing? And that's where I picked up those stones, and we just got to put those in the foundation this week. It's just kind of neat how everything just kind of comes together. So this is what happened. He went down. So came down from the mountains down to the desert, and then down on the map into Egypt. So Joseph was brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him of the hands of the Ishmaelites, which had brought him down thither. So he went down, down, down. The word Potiphar means whom Ra gave, or a priest of the bull. And if you know anything about the Egyptians, why they worshiped the bull. They worshiped the sun god Ra. And oftentimes there was a sun with the horns and everything like that. And that's what Potiphar means. Now what does Pharaoh mean? Pharaoh means great house. And of course, Pharaoh would have been the king of Egypt. So this guy who was an officer in Pharaoh's house bought Joseph from the Ishmaelites. Remember who the Ishmaelites were? They're from Ishmael, Abraham's first son. So they literally were related, and they probably didn't even know it. And yet they sell him. Back then, they must not have cared much about human life. That's kind of sad that they could just buy and sell people, and yet they're like second cousins or something. Isn't that? It's just a weird world, the way it was back then. So, verse 2 says, "And the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a prosperous man, and he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian." So he lived in the house as a slave or a servant. "And his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all that he did to prosper in his hand." Now, how different is this compared to his brothers? All right? "The Lord was with Joseph, he was prosperous. So as a slave, he did well, and he made his master rich." He must have been a hard worker and honest in order to have that testimony. And then he was blessed. So if he was honest, then he's way different than his brothers who were dishonest, that did what? That kidnapped him and then sold him into slavery and then lied to their parents and said that he died. So why do you think, now I was racking my brain this week, why do you think that he turned out better than his other brothers? Any ideas? Yeah.
Because God made it that way.
Well, because God wanted it to be that way, I guess. But remember, he's the favorite son from the favorite wife. So do you think possibly the father showed him more attention than he did the others? So I guess he's the one that got the most affection from the father and might be taught. So that is both good and bad at the same time, because that means the father didn't spend enough time with his other kids, you know, to think about that. Maybe that's why it turned out the way they did. But this one, he spent more time with them. And also because this one was blessed because he chose the right God. Do you remember the brothers, his brothers, their mother had a false god and they worshiped false gods? And Jacob had to literally say, "Put away the false gods that are among you." So if that doesn't teach you something right there, I don't know what it does. You should keep your kids close. You should love them and teach them. And you shouldn't have more than 12 children. No, I'm just kidding. Because that might be too many. No, I'm just kidding. But the closer they are to you, the more you teach them, the better they'll be. If you just let them go do whatever they want, then maybe they'll turn out bad. Maybe that's the lesson here. Okay, I'm just throwing that out there. So the next thing we read here is verse 4. "And Joseph found grace in his sight, and he served him, and he made him an overseer over his house, and all that he had he put into his hand." Now, if I remember right, I think Joseph was like 17 when they sold him into slavery. So here he's becoming 18, 19, maybe 20 years old. That's a young man. I wouldn't put a guy that young in charge of everything. But there was something about this Joseph that the guy's just like, man, everything he touches turns to gold. This guy is honest. He's good. I just want him to be in charge of everything. And he put him so much in charge of everything that we're about to read that the Lord of the house was just like, I don't know what I have. Ask Joseph. So he was so trusted that he knew everything, and the master just like, whatever you say. That's crazy, isn't it? And literally, he could have taken over, married the master's wife, and taken over everything. We're about to find out. But he did not want to do that. He did not want to sin. So here's what happens. Verse 5, "And it came to pass from the time that he had made him overseer in his house and over all that he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. And the blessing of the Lord was upon all that he had in the house and in the field." So everything that the man owned was blessed because Joseph had the right God. And you think maybe he saw that, but yet he's a priest of the wrong God. Isn't that weird? Imagine what's going on in that house. That guy's over here worshiping false gods, and he's like, "Hey, come worship." He's like, "I can't. I got my God over here." And he's got to be going, "Man, your God blesses you. My God doesn't do anything for me." I mean, you got to see there's got to be something more going on here. So he's got this great testimony that he's got the right God and that he lives right and he does right. And now the accusation comes. And boy, does the devil know how to bring an accusation to ruin your testimony, and it's not even true. And just because someone accuses you of it, then people believe it, and it destroys your testimony. That's so sad. Joseph didn't do anything. So here's what it says. "And he left all that he had in Joseph's hand," verse 6, "and he knew not aught he had, save the bread which he did eat. And Joseph was a goodly person and well favored." I just find that so fascinating. He didn't even know what he had because he put so much faith in Joseph that Joseph's like, he runs the whole thing. And everything he does is blessed. So I just come home and I just eat my bread and go to bed. And I'm sleeping knowing that Joseph's taking care of me and my family and my house and everything and my bank account. So that's a lot of faith that this lost guy with a false god put into Joseph, right? And he's only like 20-something years old. I mean, the whole thing just doesn't make much sense unless it's telling us that Joseph is really a great guy, right? So he's too great a guy because look what happens. Verse 7, and it came to pass after these things that his master's wife cast her eyes upon Joseph, and she said, lie with me. Now, you know what she meant, but isn't it funny, the word lie? Lie with me means let's go fornicate, but also what would they have to do after? Lie and say they didn't do it. So she's not asking for one sin, she's asking for two. I told my wife, I said, honey, I could never cheat on you. Because if I did, that wouldn't be the only sin. I'd have to kill the girl after. Because I could not live worrying about her telling people. I mean, so I'd have to do two sins instead of one. I mean, I just could. So the best thing to do is not do any sins, amen? How do you live like that, doing something bad and then always worrying if somebody's going to blackmail you or something like that? So Joseph's like, I don't think so. So what happens? Well, verse 8, but he refused and said unto his master's wife, behold, my master wotteth not. What means to know. I wot not is in the Bible. I know not. So I know not. The master wotteth not what is with me in the house, and he hath committed all that he hath to my hand. Now notice what he says. There is none greater in this house than I, neither hath he kept back anything from me but thee, because thou art his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? So he says that adultery is a great wickedness. And it's not just sinning against his master, it'd be sinning against God. Now, where would he have gotten this idea from? Well, there are some people that love to talk about the Noahide laws. Have you ever heard about the Noahide laws? A lot of people talk about these, and this comes from, I think it's the Talmud or something, that the Jews, it's like a Jewish tradition. So it's not in the Bible, but supposedly before the law of Moses, the law that ruled the land was the Noahide laws, which would have been from Noah. And so they claim, and again, I'm not saying I believe it or I don't, I'm just saying this is what has been taught throughout the Jewish tradition is before the law of Moses, there was the laws of Noah. They call them the Noahide laws. And the laws, there's 7 of them instead of 10. So Moses gave the 10 commandments. I guess Noah gave the 7 commandments. And they are, don't worship idols. Well, how did Joseph's brothers do? Rachel worshiped idols, so they didn't follow that. Don't curse God. Don't murder. What did they want to do? They wanted to murder Joseph, and it was Reuben that said don't do it. Don't commit adultery. Well, Judah messed up, didn't he? We saw last week. And then don't steal. Don't eat flesh that is torn. Don't eat roadkill, right? And then establish courts of justice. So if these are real, then this would have been the laws that people would have known. And this probably would have been all that Joseph knew in his day. So Joseph says, it's a sin. Why, that's the 4th commandment. I can't break the 4th commandment is what he would have said to her, I guess. Now, there's a lot of people that are afraid of the Noahide laws today. Do you know why? Because supposedly, if you do one of these things, guess what the punishment is under the Noahide law? Chop their heads off. Off with their heads. So there are people that are afraid that they'll try to bring these laws back to chop off people's heads. And all over YouTube, you hear people talk about the Noahide laws are coming back. They're going to bring back the Noahide laws and all this stuff. And, okay, I don't think I'm worried about it because those are kind of good rules to live by, right? But they think whenever the Antichrist is beheading people for not taking the mark, it's because they're under the Noahide laws. It's more of a Jewish thing, and it's more something that a lot of Jewish people talk about. I remember getting a coin. I bought something from some Jewish people one time on eBay, and there was a coin, and it had the Noahide laws on the coin. So there's a lot of Jewish people that want to follow this as well as the 10 Commandments. So I just throw that up there because, remember, we're still before the law, what we're reading. The law hasn't been written yet. So was there an unwritten rule that they live by? Why would Joseph say, it is a sin against God for me to commit adultery? if there wasn't something that his father told him? And could it have been that his father was told from Noah all the way down, these are the things you don't do, this is what you do? So that's just something to think about. I just thought I'd throw that up there. Nobody ever talks about that hardly. But again, I'm not saying I believe in the Noahide laws, and I'm not worried about them because I'm getting out of here at the rapture. I'm not worried about somebody cutting off my head if I don't follow some rules of Noah or something like that. But I did want to throw them up there. Look into that more if you want to and find out more about that. So he says this is a great sin. So adultery is a great sin. Let's look at 4 different places in the Bible that call this a sin. And what is adultery? We remember what adultery is. Adultery is if you're single but she's married and you have relations with her. Or you're married and she's single, or vice versa. He, her, whoever, whichever. So adultery is somebody's married and they're cheating on somebody. Fornication is just 2 people getting together and doing something they shouldn't. So there's a difference between fornication and adultery. Both are a sin. We saw last week that fornication, God killed 23,000 people because they fornicated, because God said, I don't like this. So adultery is almost worse. It's like a chop your head off a fence if you believe that. So let's look at under the law, Exodus chapter 20. Exodus chapter 20. And in Exodus chapter 20 and verse 14, we read this. This is the 10 Commandments. And the 7th commandment is, thou shalt not commit adultery. So that's under the law. That was given by Moses in about 1491 BC. Okay? Now let's look at Jesus, Matthew chapter 5. And I found it interesting how he says this in Matthew chapter 5 and verse 27. Matthew 5:27. And by the way, why is adultery so bad? Because when you get married, you say, till death do us part. And you make a vow to be faithful to that person till you die. So if you commit adultery, then what happens? Not only have you sinned, you have lied. You did not keep your vow. Does that make sense? So that's part of it. So that's funny how she said, lie with me. Because they would lie together, but then she'd have to lie and he'd have to lie. So it's not a good thing to lie. Now, Matthew chapter 5, verse 27 says this. Ye have heard that it was said by them of old time, thou shalt not commit adultery. I thought that was fascinating. Why didn't Jesus say, ye have heard that the law of Moses says, don't commit adultery? Because that's what the law, but he says, no, you've heard of them of old time saying. So is that like a reference to this? I don't know. I just read that and I was like, wow, that's weird. Because usually he says, remember the law of Moses says this, the law. But here Jesus says, remember those people a long time ago said this? So could he be referring to that? I don't know. I'm just throwing that out there. I thought that was interesting. Now let's go to Paul in Romans 13:9. And that raises this question. And I'm going to ask you this question. I want to see what you guys say. As you're turning to Romans 13:9. How many of you think that we're still under the 10 Commandments? Raise your hand. Do you still think we're under the 10 Commandments? Anybody think?
It's written on our hearts and in our mind.
Well, it's in our conscience. Yeah, it's written in our hearts and our mind. But are we under the 10 Commandments to be saved today? If we keep the 10 Commandments, we get to heaven. Okay, so good. Nobody rose their hand. Okay, so amen. But I know what you're saying. Yeah, it's something that God writes in our hearts. But are we to keep the 10 Commandments today for salvation? That's what I'm asking. And the answer is no. And also, it's impossible to keep the 10 Commandments today because there's one of them that was only for Israel that's not applied today. So when you look at the 10 Commandments and you read those, they're all reiterated in the New Testament, not for salvation, but for a rule of how to live, except for one, and that's the Sabbath. So we see Paul never tells us, ever, keep the Sabbath day holy. Did you know that? Because Exodus 31 says the Sabbath is for Israel, and it says twice, you shall be put to death if you don't keep the Sabbath. How could that possibly apply to today? If we go to church on Sunday, then you need to come and stone us to death if we're still under the Old Testament law. Because Saturday is the Sabbath. Well, I didn't keep it. You don't keep it. So there's people out there that say, you got to keep the Sabbath, you got to keep the 10 Commandments, you got to keep them. they must not read their Bibles, because 9 of the 10 are reiterated in the New Testament, and they're not for salvation, but that one is never given to the church. Keep the Sabbath day. Our day is the first day of the week, Sunday, that we remember, and it's because Jesus rose the first day of the week. And I can show you in the Bible when he showed up to the apostles, he showed up on Sunday. Okay, so I have to say that. All right, now, where did I say? Go to Romans 13:9. And is that the verse that I written down? Romans 13:9. Yep, here it is. So here he's reiterating some of the 10 commandments. And in verse 9 he says, for this thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not bear false witness, and on and on and on. But the first one is thou shalt not commit adultery. And in the Old Testament, did you know that if you did commit adultery, it was the death penalty? You were to stone people to death. What happened to David, though, when he committed adultery? He was the one God showed mercy to, but he deserved to die. So there were a lot of people that committed adultery that should have been stoned. Now, James chapter 2 and verse 11. So I'm giving you 4 different witnesses of don't commit adultery. And it's really sad that we live in a world today where people think there's nothing wrong with it. It's okay. Let's just go do that. No, there was the death penalty on that, because God did not want that to happen. James chapter 2 and verse 11. For he that said, do not commit adultery, said also, do not kill. Now that if thou commit adultery, yet if thou kill, thou art become a transgressor of the law. So the Bible is very clear, no free love. You get married and you stick together till death do you part. So it's fascinating to me that Joseph knew enough Bible, although there wasn't a lot of Bible in his time, the law hadn't been written yet. He knew enough that this is a sin because it's stealing another man's wife, it's committing adultery, and then he would have to lie about it. The trifecta. And he knew that he'd be worthy of death if he did that, if this is a real thing, because this says off with their heads if they do one of these things. So that really is a grievous sin. I don't know if you ever thought of that. But do you see how he's literally asking her to commit a crime that he could die for if the master finds out. Because even if there weren't the Noahide laws, what would the master do? The master would be well within his rights to, okay. All right, enough of that. So back to Genesis chapter 39. And by the way, he'd be very angry too, probably. So 39:9. He asked, how can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? And it came to pass as he spake to Joseph day by day that he hearkened, And it came to pass as she spake to Joseph day by day that he hearkened not unto her to lie by her or to be with her. So she kept asking and kept asking and kept asking. And it came to pass about this time that Joseph went into the house to do his business, and there was none of the men of the house there within. Now this is very important, the importance of a chaperone. As a preacher, we know we never want to be in a room with a woman who's not our wife alone. So if I ever have to talk to somebody, I want my wife with me. Or, we'll be in a public location, we'll just go over to the corner and talk and everyone else can see us, but we never get alone in a room because people will talk, right? How's that old song go? Let's give them something to talk about. A little mystery to figure out or something like that. So that's not a good thing. Well, he always had other ones there with him. All of a sudden, now they're all alone. Verse 12, and she caught him by his garment, saying, lie with me. And he left his garment in her hand and fled and got him out. So she's literally handsy, I guess you could say. She's grabbing his garment so hard that he pulls away and he runs away, and she's holding his garment. So he's running away naked, or maybe half naked, maybe just his coat, but still it's going to look pretty bad. And it does look pretty bad. And he probably should have said something to his master, but his master would have accused him of lying probably. So he's not in a win-win situation. And he left his garment in her hand and fled and got him out. And it came to pass when she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and was fled forth, that she called unto the men of her house and spake unto them, saying, see, he hath brought in an Hebrew unto us to mock us. He came in unto me to lie with me, and I cried with a loud voice. No, you didn't. I don't think she did. I think she lied, and she sat there, and then she said, oh, well, he's gone. Oh, but he's like on the other side of the house, you know. So she's just like, if I can't have him, I'm angry. I'm going to take out my anger on him. Now, notice what she says. You brought in a Hebrew to mock us. Did you know the Egyptians never liked the Hebrews? Why is that? Let's look at Genesis 46 and verse 34. I don't know if you'll call it racism, but we'll call it tribalism. The tribe of the Egyptians didn't really like the tribes of the Jews that much. Genesis chapter 46 and verse 34. That ye shall say, thy servant's trade hath been about cattle from our youth even until now, both we and also our fathers, that we may dwell in the land of Goshen, for every shepherd is an abomination to the Egyptians. For some reason, Egyptians hated sheep. Egyptians loved bulls and cattle, but they hated sheep. So they looked at the Jews, oh, those sheep herders over there. Oh, those cattlemen over there. You know what's really funny is I don't watch a lot of movies, but I do remember as a kid watching some Western out west in America where it was the cattle people against the sheep people. And the cattle people looked down on the sheep people. And I was just like, wow, that's fascinating, because that reminds us of what happened thousands of years ago in Egypt, and now in America you see the same thing. What's wrong with sheep? Nothing. But I guess you get more meat and more money out of cows and cattle than you do out of sheep. So maybe that has to do with it. So back to Genesis chapter 40, she wanted him, and now she's turning on him, and she's like, yeah, that Hebrew over there, you know, and she's playing that card as well. So she's pretending that he tried to rape her, okay? Now, verse 15, and it came to pass when he heard that I lifted up my voice and cried, that he left his garment with me and fled and got him out. So she's saying he ran out when I said, no, no, no. But he didn't. He ran out because she was trying to push herself on him. And she laid up his garment by her until his Lord came home. So she kept the garment, and she said, well, I'm going to tell on him. She's about to lie through her teeth. 17, and she spake unto him according to these words, saying, the Hebrew servant, which thou hast brought unto us, came in unto me to mock me. And it came to pass, as I lifted up my voice and cried, that he left his garment with me and fled out. And it came to pass, when his master heard the words of his wife, which she spake unto him, saying, after this manner did thy servant to me, that his wrath was kindled. And rightly so, if that was true. But you know what? It was an accusation that could not be proven. And the way she tried to prove it is she tried to say, well, how did I get his garment then? Well, you pulled it off of him. But he didn't want to believe that she would have done something bad. So what happens, verse 20, and Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, a place where the king's prisoners were bound, and he was there in the prison. So he was bound in a prison. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. So he goes to jail just like Jesus went to jail. Jesus was innocent. Joseph was innocent. Now, verse 22. And the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hands all the prisoners that were in the prison, and whatsoever they did there, he was the doer of it. And the keeper of the prison looked not to anything that was under his hand, because the Lord was with him, and that which he did, the Lord made to prosper. So just like in the house there, he showed his honesty and he got lifted up to the highest. Now in jail, he's showing himself as he's honest, and he gets the heart of the warden, I guess you would call him, the guy in charge, and now he's raised up to the highest position as the prisoner. And we see later he's raised up to... God keeps blessing him. Why? Because he did right, not because he did wrong. Does that make sense? So now, chapter 40, we'll read through that quickly. Verse 1, and it came to pass after these things that the butler of the king of Egypt and his baker had offended their lord, the king of Egypt. Now what did they do? I have no idea. It doesn't tell us. And Pharaoh was wroth against two of his officers, against the chief of the butlers and against the chief of the bakers. And he put them in ward. This is where we get the word warden, where we get the word warden from. And put them in ward in the house of the captain of the guard into the prison, the place where Joseph was bound. And the captain of the guard charged Joseph with them, and he served them, and they continued a season in the ward. And they dreamed a dream, both of them, each man his dream in one night, each man according to the interpretation of his dream, the butler and the baker of the king of Egypt, which were bound in the prison. So here we have a butler and a baker, okay? The butler, we find out, is the guy that brings the drink and gives the wine to the I guess he gives the food too. He gives it all out. The baker is the guy that bakes the bread. So they're the food service people, if you will, I guess is the way to look at that. They go to jail with Joseph. And it says Joseph served them. So he's still a servant. Isn't that something? And then they both have some dreams. So let's look at the dreams that they had. Verse 9. Where did I stop? Verse 6. And Joseph came in unto them in the morning and looked upon them, and behold, they were sad. And he asked Joseph's officers that were with him in the ward of his Lord's house, saying, Wherefore look ye so sadly today? And they said unto him, We have dreamed a dream, and there is no interpreter of it. And Joseph said unto them, Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me them, I pray you. And the chief butler told his dream to Joseph, and said to him, In my dream, behold, a vine was before me, and in the vine were 3 branches, and it was as though it budded, and her blossoms shot forth, and the clusters therefore brought forth ripe grapes. And Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup, and I gave the cup into Pharaoh's hands. And Joseph said unto him, This is the interpretation of it. So Joseph must have had God. Maybe he's filled with the Holy Spirit. You know, in the Old Testament, people could be filled with the Holy Spirit, but then it could leave, and then it could come back, and then it could leave, and it could come back, and it could leave. David prayed, Lord, take not thy spirit from me. How about today when we're saved? No. It says we're sealed with the Holy Spirit of promise today in Ephesians 1:13. So it was different in the Old Testament. But he somehow could interpret dreams. So here is the interpretation. Verse 13, Yet within 3 days shall Pharaoh lift up thine head and restore thee unto thy place, and thou shalt deliver Pharaoh's cup into his hand, after the former matter when thou wast his butler. But think on me when it shall be well with thee, and show kindness, I pray thee, unto me, and make mention of me unto Pharaoh, and bring me out of this house. For indeed I was stolen away out of the land of the Hebrews, and here also have I done nothing that they should put me in the dungeon. So he tells him the interpretation of his dream, and he's like, dude, yeah, that's easy. That's an easy one. I mean, I don't know why, I don't know, but that's how God would speak to people back then. And so he said, yeah, in 3 days you're going to go back, and you're good. Now, don't forget me. Well, did he forget him? Yeah, for a little while. What we'll find out next week is eventually he remembered him. But he should have remembered him first thing. Now, verse 16, when the chief baker saw that the interpretation was good, he said unto Joseph, I also was in my dream, and behold, I had 3 white baskets on my head. And in the uttermost basket there was of all manner of baked meats for Pharaoh, and the birds that eat them out of the basket upon my head. And Pharaoh answered and said, This is interpretation. This is the interpretation thereof. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Yet within 3 days shall Pharaoh lift up thy head from off thee, and shall hang thee on a tree, and the birds shall eat thy flesh from off thee. Oh boy. And it came to pass the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, that he made a feast unto all his servants, and he lifted up the head of the chief butler and of the chief baker among his servants, and restored the chief butler unto his butlership again, and he gave the cup unto Pharaoh's hand. But he hanged the chief baker as Joseph had interpreted to him. Yet did not the chief butler remember Joseph, but forgat him. So there's a lot of things we can see here. First of all, I find it fascinating, 3 days. Why is it 3 days? What do you think of when you think of Jesus? He rose again 3rd day, so 3 days, 3 nights. We've got a butler and a baker. A butler, well, the butler would squeeze what? He would squeeze grapes into the cup. That's what the Bible calls new wine. Wine can be fermented liquor or fresh, okay? And also, oftentimes, when the Bible talks about wine, you have to look at the context to see. There's strong drink or old wine. And then there's new wine, which would be grape juice. So grape juice is called wine. So he would squeeze. Now the baker, we would think of a baker as bread. So what would you think of when you see bread and wine? Well, you think of Jesus, right? And Jesus said, I am the vine. And that was the one that lived, that was the one that died. And Jesus was the bread of life. And what happened? He died and was put. So I'm looking at all this and I'm like, wow, that reminds me of Jesus. That reminds me of Jesus. That reminds me of Jesus. So it's a sad thing that this guy dies, but that's what happened to him. So Joseph was forgotten by the butler. How long was he forgotten? Let's look at the next verse and not give it away for next week, but just read verse 1. And it came to pass at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh dreamed, and behold, he stood by the river. And then we find out, then he's remembered. So 2 years. Well, a day with the Lord is 1,000 years. 1,000 years is 1 day. Well, this isn't 2 days. This is 2 years. Well, we're told in the Bible that in Numbers 14:34, a day for a year. So is this stretching it to think that maybe this is 2,000 years? That the Jews reject their Messiah, so 2,000 years they have to wait? I don't know. I'm just throwing that out there. I'm not going to write everything up here. But it's interesting that after 2 full years, makes us think of maybe 2 days or 2,000 years, that the Jews are in captivity until they're able to come back to their Messiah who calls them back. And what do? Well, the Bible says they'll dream dreams and visions in the last days. So there's your dreams again. So that's interesting. So next week, we'll be looking at Pharaoh's dream of 7 good years and 7 bad years. Now, is that a type of the tribulation? Is there going to be 7 good years, then the rapture, and then 7 bad years? If so, the rapture is coming real soon. Are we in the 7 good years right now? Does this feel good to you? High gas prices, war with Iran. Well, that's a good year. Well, it could be worse. So maybe this is as good as it gets. I don't know. But I think it is pointing to a 7-year future tribulation. So that's what I got for you today. We finished up really early. Anybody have any questions? Yes, ma'am.
This is just off the top of my head, but could the butler and the baker be types of the 2 thieves on the cross?
Yep, so there's another one too. We have Jesus on the cross, and who was next to him? Well, there were 2 thieves. And one said, remember me when you enter into the kingdom. The other said, I don't want to have anything to do with you, and he mocked him. So that would be a good type, wouldn't it, of that. So the baker would be the type of the one that rejected Jesus, and the butler would be the type of the one that accepted him. And how do you accept him? Through faith in the blood, through the wine. You know, that's an interesting thought. So yeah, that's good too. I actually had that in my notes, but I just went over it, didn't say anything. Interpretations belong to God. There's a lot of notes here that I could have gone into on the dreams. People ask all the time, what do you think about dreams? I say be careful with dreams, especially with the food we eat nowadays. I mean, you ever eaten a pizza late at night and then had a weird dream? So be careful. God talks to us through the Bible. Yes, we can have dreams, and yes, they can come true, but we never should put that above the Scripture. Nothing wrong with talking about your dreams, but when you say, I had this dream and it's going to happen because I dreamed it, no, be careful. It might happen, it might not, but don't ever put more faith in a dream than in the Scriptures, okay? Because then that's how new doctrines and new cults get started, right? I had a dream and an angel appeared to me and he gave me these golden plates, and whoa, we got to be careful of stuff like that. So anybody else, any questions? Wow, we're really early. I went really fast through 2 chapters. All right, well, let's take some time, get some coffee and some donuts, and we'll stop right there. Amen. Appreciate it.